everyone for showing up on a glorious, manageable, DC, not too humid, early summer, not quite, but late spring, early summer evening. My name is Darren Coet. I run the DC Alumni Club at Columbia Business School here, and I'm really thrilled that we have a timely, topical, and distinctively regional set of programming for you tonight. I'd like to just start with a couple of high-level overview. I'll do my quick thank yous, and then we will, our special honored guest, Representative Lefebvre. We will have one of my fellow board members for Columbia University Club, who was roommates with him when they were both at Columbia, give his introduction. Then I will run through just a couple of slides to kind of prime you on the various lenses that we're looking through tonight's content on, and then I'm going to turn it over to the panelists. So first off, again, thanks to our hosts here at AdComEd, Chris Mullaney, who is very helpful in getting all the logistics set up, and Ken Mendez, who is our certification saint, who always comes to the end when we need a large conference space. This is Ken over here in the red tie. I'd like to thank Linda Dooley of the Bryce Carlos Foundation. She gave us some great programming advice as things were starting to come together. And then, of course, all of our panelists include Ken Birnbaum of the Pear Tree Group, who will be coming up in a moment, Sam Morgente of Genworth Financial, David Wilkie of Senator Lugar's office, Doyle Bartlett of Eris Group, and then Alan Platt of Gibson Dunn could not be here tonight. I will be sending out PDFs with people's contact information and bios, etc., but I know you like, so give me 2 or 3 days and we'll do it as follow-up. It's been 2 events in 2 weeks. It's been a rather stressful time for me. And then finally, a special thanks to Brian Donahue of H&R Block, who is the intellectual father of the program that you're about to see. He approached me late last fall, and we started working together in February, and here we are. I'm thrilled with the attendance. So, the Columbia board is here, and I just hope that I got 2 representatives of the Columbia University Club board here. The B School Club would not be where it is if it weren't for the close collaboration. We have frequent events looking across the 2 of them. I'd say 2 or 3 a month. And I'll just do my little pitch for membership. Membership in either club helps to make sure that we can operate from a position of strength. And that's really important in a town like DC because we can't assume that Ken will come to the rescue at the last moment, as he in practice always has proven to do. But anyway, so this is Joe Foyer, my board member, who will introduce Representative Dan Lefebvre.
Thanks, Darren. My name is Joe Foyer, and I'm here not because I went to Columbia Business School. I actually went to the School of International Affairs, but I'm here because I'm a old friend of Dan's, and also because I'm, as Darren said, on the board of the Columbia University Alumni Club here in DC. Dan gave me, it's the second time I've had the honor and pleasure of introducing Dan at a Columbia event in the last year, and he always says, "To joke, just keep it short and don't embarrass me." And I promised to do what to do both. Basically, I know Dan because we were roommates when we were in grad school. Dan was at the journalism school, and I was at the School of International Affairs, and we lived in a rather nice apartment actually on 120th in Amsterdam. I just, it's actually hard to think of anything that would embarrass Dan because he was and is just a really smart, really good guy, really friendly, and knew more about politics and history, and American politics, American history of almost anyone I'd ever met, even back then. We've stayed friends ever since. After grad school, he went on to be a TV reporter. I went overseas for a while and did some stuff, and then he went on to another Ivy League school, some school I haven't heard of up in Cambridge, Mass. And so Dan, in fact, does have degrees from Brown and from Columbia and from the Kennedy School. Dan, as you may know, is the congressman of the New York 25th Congressional District, representing Syracuse and surrounding counties. He's on the Financial Services Committee, the Judiciary Committee, has been active on issues like credit card holders' bill of rights, and has also taken the lead on legislation to protect small business owners and reform the financial services industry and protect consumers. There's a whole lengthy biography that I promised Dan I wouldn't read, so I'm not going to do that. But most of all, Dan is just a great guy, and I'm so proud to introduce to you all Congressman Dan Buffet.
Joe is always very, very kind, and was really, I mean, you're not that much older than me. I was kind of caught up, but at the time, I was coming back from college. He'd been out a couple of years, and I just really dreamed someday of having Joe's social life. It never really quite came to pass, but it was interesting. Even now, I mean, he's still more married than I am. But loved going to the journalism school. For those of you, many of you go to business school, we're the Columbia graduates who would go on to work for you. Most of the journalistic outlets are, in fact, owned by large corporations now, for better or for worse, and I think actually for both in many ways. But that was true for a long time. I, of course, though, even among Columbia journalism grads, I'm sort of regarded as a bit of a failure given what I do now. I was talking to Ann Kornbluth today, another Columbia grad, although not the journalism school, just undergrad, but she's now the White House correspondent for the Washington Post. And it's sort of kind of interesting because we were sort of sharing our background. She's like, journalism school? Yeah, that's right, I didn't. But anyway, it was a great year, and Columbia is such a great university, so I'm always proud to speak at their events. I just want to speak very, very briefly, almost in way of just introduction, in terms of changing, talking about this actual program, government relations. Mainly because I think this has been an area which has really become almost stigmatized by the media and to a certain extent by we in politics, desperately looking for somebody who might be less popular than us. And so we found them, right? Lobbyists, right? The Scarlet L. And that's really government relations, is that? But make no mistake, first of all, you're in the Constitution. Anybody who does government relations, anybody who requires government relations, petition the government for redress of grievances. And it's absolutely understood that this would occur, and it should occur. Secondly, I can tell you as a congressman from a district that is a little underserved. It's a very diverse district. I have the city of Syracuse, including Syracuse University. I have suburbs of Syracuse and of Rochester. I don't mean the city of Rochester, and I have a lot of rural areas. I do not know what I would do, given the size of my staff, if I didn't have people who lobbied for industries and businesses and universities and other institutions in my district. I simply would not be able to make sure that all of the interests of my district are protected. And furthermore, particularly in this era when earmarks have become also a dirty word and when so much government funding is so-called merit-based grant funding, et cetera, you have to apply for all these grants. And that's what a lot of lobbyists do. It's not just a matter, certainly people who are in government relations do an awful lot of that. So it's become an extraordinarily important thing. Increasingly important, by the way, for smaller and smaller businesses. And the smart business folks have really now gotten together and formed coalitions. AdvoNet, after all, is a coalition. And it's interesting because, of course, they're very, very large members of AdvoNet that you've probably heard of. But they're also, Medtronic, Johnson & Johnson. But there's also much smaller members. And in terms of what they lobby for, they have a whole, even when they come to the office, even AdvoNet itself isn't particularly a model. They'll go, well, here's some members, this, whatever. But at least they're out there and they're saying, what affects these particular companies. It's extremely important to have that in because so much of what goes on is so complicated. And I don't think it's complicated truly because someone's trying to pull the wool under someone's eyes. These, the complaints, well, it's 1,200 pages, it must be bad. I don't think that's true. I think the world is complicated. And in some ways, you look at, some of these bills and you go, gee, it's really only that long? And, it's very important that we understand the full implications of these bills, and reading them doesn't do it. I read bills, and I can tell you it's like reading a computer program. There are English words in it, And if you're a computer scientist, you will know what it does. But it doesn't mean, sub-vocalizing every word in legislation doesn't do much good, no matter what the Tea Party says. What you need to do is understand them. Far, far more important. And law bills are more difficult to understand, and it is important that we get them in time in order to digest them and understand what's in them. And the whole government relations process is part of that. But the idea that a bill itself, because it is long, is bad, I think is, again, just very simple, sort of simplistic thinking. But it's an easy soundbite, and people will sometimes say, this bill's this long, it must be horrible, What are they trying to sneak in here? Well, the fact is, with so many different lobbying groups and so many different interest groups looking at it, and so many different people and so many different members, it is going to work. Madison was not wrong in Penn Federalist. If you had enough of these interest groups going on, they would check each other, and that indeed is what happens. So in that sense, having a government relations team, either having your own in-house or hiring one, is the same as having a lawyer in court. You would never dream of going into court and not having an attorney. And yet, any of you who have any business that involves government at all, which is to say all of you, should have at least some sort of representation, or you're really kind of being foolish. Now, there are large groups, large companies that have done very, very well with very slim government relations offices. One I'll pick because it's so big is Google. And a lot of the original founders of Google sort of felt that Washington is sort of a kind of a muddy, dirty place. And yes, it is in a swamp, which we find out this time of year, as I get extraordinarily homesick this time of year for the great weather that is central New York. It really is. You'd rather be in central New York this time of year than any other place in the country, I believe, in terms of weather. But they look at it as a swamp and kind of buy into that cynicism that you see is very prevalent in the media. But in fact, they finally came around to having their own government relations shop and are sort of slowly gearing up because they realized that they couldn't even get their message out. People weren't even understanding their products. I was talking to my wife who works at CARE, who does not actually do government relations, but she does build public-private partnerships. And so sometimes she works with the government relations people from CARE. CARE is the large international NGO, does development work, mostly work about empowerment of women and girls, a lot of education, literacy stuff, micro-lending, etc. But they kind of have this hierarchy in their office, levels of understanding of people that they deal with. And so they have obviously experts and university folks and things like that, and then they have people at other NGOs, and then you go down and you have people at kind of international groups, you have U.S. government regulators and people like that, and then you have congressional staff, and at the very bottom you have members of Congress who are the dumbest on these issues. Now, you've heard my education. I don't think I'm dumb. I certainly don't think I'm brilliant, but I don't think I'm dumb. But I do have to worry about so much stuff, such a broad array of things, that my knowledge base is going to be a mile wide and an inch deep. And so again, it's not, if you want to be taken seriously, if you want to make sure that your arguments in a complex world, complex issues are understood, you're going to need to have that presence. So look, I'm not here to tell you that, to actually put forth a point of view that everybody's got to go out and hire this particular firm or that firm, or there's any one way to do it. You don't necessarily have to have registered lobbyists to get your point across. But I do think that you're making a mistake if you sort of look at this, if you look at the government and you go, well, I see all these government relations people and all these lobbyists, and it's just icky, and I don't want to deal with that. You're putting yourself at a disadvantage again. It would be just as if you would go into court and not have a lawyer. You may not like the way the system works, and particularly with the health care bill, I think one of the reasons why, at least for a time, people were very, very skeptical of it was the process. And the analogy that's always used in political science classes, and still should be, is